Welcome to the Ben and Lauren Show. I'm Ben, and this is Lauren, and here we are, Saturday night. And you may notice a little bit of a difference with the audio. We got lapel mics. See?
Let's hope there's a difference.
I don't know if you can hear tap, tap, tap.
Yeah, you just blew their ears out.
All right. Well, you should be able to hear my voice a lot clearer. And how about Lauren's?
It looks like it's picking up about equally, judging by the little audio bar there.
All right. So no more earbuds in our ears. And now you can hear me and Lauren equally, hopefully. We'll see. It's a double lapel, so I have a mic, she has a mic, and it's plugged right in.
It said it was made for interviews?
Yep. So now we can talk, and it won't sound quite as tinny.
Let's hope.
But whenever we replay our Ben and Lauren show, I can hear this kind of, the audio's a little bit off.
Well, I never thought of it as a professional production, so.
It's certainly not. So what did we do this week?
Well, going back to last show, we were talking about how we were expecting snow.
Oh, yeah.
The weather report was telling us we were going to get snow. At one point, it was telling us 8 inches on Monday.
And we believed them.
Well,
shame on us.
No, I did not believe them.
I did.
Thought there was something fishy about the 8 inches of snow because that was the 30th of April. I mean, we don't get snow in May.
I'm just imagining this big cold snap.
Well, sometimes we get
weather.
a frost that late, but our frost date's next week. To get 8 inches of snow,
that would have really messed things up.
I was really suspicious. And then as it turned out, as we got closer and closer to the actual day, oh, look at that. It's rain, not snow. And then...
and now we get warnings about rain and warnings about flooding and things like that.
Yeah, there were some people in our area had some pretty severe flooding, but when I saw the pictures, it was flooding from the streets up to the houses. And in that area a few years ago, they had a really bad flood. And it turned out that their pumps, they have pumps that turn on when they get a lot of water in the street, that clear the street, and they pump all the water out to the spillways into the lake. Well, a couple of years ago, the problem was that somebody decided to steal all the electrical wiring out of the pump station to turn it in for the copper scrap. So their pumps had no power, and I'm guessing something like that happened again. It's one of those kind of areas. And judging by what I saw, their pumps weren't working. So it wasn't exactly like we had a river overflow its banks or anything.
Yeah, now our street floods pretty much every time there's a heavy rain. Always gets us a little bit nervous, but it's been doing that since I was a little boy. I grew up next door, so literally I've been here over 40 years.
40 years. You moved when you were 1, and we've got pictures of him at like Abigail's age, maybe 6 or 7, paddling around in the street.
Yeah, in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So it's been doing this forever. It's not anything new, but they've never fixed it. And decade after decade after decade, there's got to be a way to correct that.
We're the low point of the subdivision.
Yeah, so all the water pools into this corner, and that's basically where we are, right in front of our house.
Yeah, Mom and Dad's yard has the last year or so. They built a sunroom on their house, and ever since then, their backyard just floods when it rains. Well, our kids think it's fun to go play in the flood in Nan and Papa's house.
Splash, splash.
Daniel walked out there in his regular shoes. Ugh. I did not realize it was flooded, and I look out, and he's standing there up to his ankles in water. It's like, oh, no.
Boots. We need rain boots for him.
He's the only one that doesn't have rain boots.
But the other girls do.
Yeah, the girls do. And I think we should get some for Daniel because he really enjoys being outside and splashing in water.
Gotta get my boy some boots.
Our boy needs some boots. He
so
needs
he can
new
splash
shoes,
around.
Too.
Yeah, they keep falling off his feet.
Yeah.
Now his feet are looking better, right?
Yeah, that was a big thing this week. His eczema in his feet is all cleared up now that his teeth are in. Mm-hmm. So now we've had to break him of this habit of incessantly scratching his feet. So he scratches little scabs on them. And then, as the scabs begin to heal and itch, he starts all over, scratches the scabs off and scratches all the skin, the new skin that's grown. He scratches it off and we start over again. So we won a bottle of something called Nixall.
We have it?
Yeah, I think we got it out. From the American Homestead from the Bauer family.
Stuff works great.
And they kept saying how well this worked on all kinds of stuff. And then there was an incident where Jamie is recovering from surgery, and she had a very serious situation going on where they thought she was actually going to have to go back into the hospital because the wound from the surgery was not healing. And they ended up using this Nixall very carefully, very regularly, and the wound healed spectacularly well in the course of, I don't know if it was a few days or a whole week.
Now on here it describes sunburns, cuts, mosquito, insect bites,
yeah, it
burns,
sounds very, it doesn't sound like anything serious would really get healed with
rashes,
this,
lip sores, dry skin.
But we'd heard their family talking about how well they'd been able to use this and how it had really helped them a lot. So I thought, the thing with Daniel's feet, if we could break his cycle of scratching the scabs off, get those scabs to heal fast enough that he doesn't really have a chance to reopen them, then we'd be able to get his feet to actually heal up. So I started spraying this on his feet. I did it 2 or 3 times a day, and I would spray it all over the part that was affected, and then I would put A&D ointment, which is mostly lanolin, over top of that, and it actually mixed in with the Nixall very well. And I basically spread that on his feet to keep his skin soft, and also to keep the Nixall basically on there. And then I put socks on him so that he couldn't wash it all off.
Well, they're looking way better.
In 3 days, all the scabs but one are off his feet. He's got one little scab left.
He still obsessively scratches himself, though.
He hasn't been scratching his feet today. He's been scratching his leg, so I started doing the same thing to his leg.
That's good.
But not his feet. I haven't seen him scratch his feet today.
Good.
Anyway, if we can just get the skin on his feet to heal up enough that he doesn't have new skin on there that's fragile, I think he'll be okay. And his feet have not looked this good since he was about 9 months old when he first started having trouble with eczema on them. So he's 18 months now.
I'm glad he's doing better.
I think we've talked about this before. We've tried all kinds of stuff on his feet.
So we're trying to heal up his feet so we can put the tape on it so we can
Yeah, we
get it
talked about
straightened
that
out.
last week. I think, was it Hebrew Housewife was asking us if we could show pictures of what the taping looked like. And actually, if you wanted to look up a video of the kind of taping we're going to do, it's called spiral taping for an interior tibial rotation.
Wow.
So it's called kinesthesiology tape, I believe. And
KT?
Yeah, it's also called KT taping, spiral taping. And you'll probably only see videos of adults. I did see some pediatric videos, but they weren't doing the spiral taping in the pediatric, just the adults. But that was what we were directed to do. So I'm hoping to do that in the next few days because his skin's looking so much better.
But we haven't done it yet.
I haven't done it yet because he had broken skin in the places where you have to apply the tape. And because it puts some pull on the skin, you wouldn't want to do that over broken skin.
So what else did we do this week? Last week, we didn't really talk about it, but I started a batch of wine.
Actually, you did it this week.
Was it this week?
I believe that you did that on Wednesday.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Time flies. So we got it. I've had a recipe for dandelion wine for quite a while, and we were just waiting for the dandelions to come up.
We had everything all ready.
It's a weed, it's all over the place. And the girls started noticing these dandelions all over the place, and she would, I think it was Abigail and Susanna would bring them in. And say,
they knew you wanted dandelions.
They say, look, we got dandelions. So they would collect 1, 2, 3, and they were going to collect this for the dandelion wine. So finally I said, okay, we're gonna really do this.
Well, one day they started bringing in handfuls. It was on Wednesday morning they started finding handfuls of them, so we knew the dandelions are blooming for real.
Yeah, you're right, it was Wednesday.
So much for snow.
Yeah, so much for snow. So we got a gallon bag and we walked to the edge of the neighborhood, found a field, and just started picking dandelions like like crazy.
We didn't want to pick them out of anybody's yard because everybody else except us sprays, weed killer all over their yard.
It's not our yards. So we found a neutral ground to pick a whole bunch of dandelions.
And a place where nobody's going to spray because nobody cares. It was an empty lot.
Right. So we brought back a whole bag full of, gallon bag full of dandelions, and our hands were yellow from picking dandelions. So the recipe is not just dandelions. It has lemons, limes, lemons
and
oranges, and what else? Raisins.
Very strong black tea.
Strong black tea, a lot of sugar, and other wine-making ingredients.
Got some tannins.
And I've got it right here.
And
Look at that thing.
When we first put it in, it was a very, very dark brown. It did not look anything like you'd expect dandelion wine. It looked like iced tea.
If you look really closely, you can see all the bubbles. It's bubbling. It's not, you don't see this bubble very often right now, but the first day
it was glug, glug,
it was
glug, glug, glug.
Yeah. Now it's kind of slowed down.
You learned something interesting about the wine yeast. You have to use a champagne type of wine yeast, but you learned something very interesting about it that you didn't know for your last batch of wine.
My last batch we made was cranberry wine. And same thing, we just got cranberry juice and apple juice and a lot of sugar, and it was just a super sweet mixture.
It's not anymore.
No. But our recipe, yeah, it's very tart now. But our recipe was for 5 gallons, so we divided everything by 5, including the yeast. So I took the packet and I weighed it, and I put in exactly 1/5 of that packet into the wine. And it started bubbling, but it was bubbling really slowly. And after about a week or two, it seemed like it just totally stopped.
We ended up having to let it go about 3 weeks longer than its original. It went for 6 weeks instead of 3 weeks before it finally cleared, and we got the impression that the fermenting had stopped.
Yeah, we had to let it go way longer than we expected. So I read, because I was curious, okay, we had this recipe that says put the yeast in, but it doesn't say how much. So I didn't know how much yeast to put in for a 1 gallon serving of wine. Turns out you always use 1 packet. No matter the size, no matter the batch, you always use 1 full packet.
Up to 5 gallons.
Up to 5 gallons. So, yeah, I guess you're right.
After that, you have to use more.
It's up to 5 gallons. But if you have less than 5 gallons, you got to open up that packet, pop the whole thing in there, and that's the way it is.
Apparently, a packet contains the minimum amount of yeast needed to create the correct yeast colony to properly ferment a batch of wine. So you need the minimum amount, up to 5 gallons, and
so mystery solved. I think we found out why it took so long for the last batch.
Well, on this one, you put it in, then the next day it was like fizzing. There was so much
we proofed the yeast,
going on.
we let it go, and it smelled really good.
It smells different than bread yeast.
It does. So we poured it in, and it went from like a dark brown to what you just saw there, with almost like a golden kind of a lighter brown color.
And the raisins are changing too. They all plumped up and they were practically filling the container, and now all of a sudden they're shrinking almost down to nothing. I'm wondering if the yeast is actually eating the raisins.
No idea. No idea. All I know is that it's very sweet. I put a lot of sugar in there, and that along with everything else, it'll be interesting when it's done. So
yeah.
We have, next Wednesday it'll be 1 week, and then 1 week from there it'll be 2 weeks. And we'll kind of gauge it from there, because it says 2 to 3 weeks. We'll see how it's doing.
I found it interesting that while you use the dandelion flowers, you basically brew a dandelion tea out of the flowers. You don't put the flowers in there to ferment. The oranges and the lemons and the raisins are in there, but there's no dandelion flowers. They're already gone.
So I'm thinking it's going to be more of a orange and lemon citrusy type of drink, kind of a wine. I would assume.
I have no idea.
We'll find
I've
out.
never had dandelion.
But there's a lot of raisins in there. We're supposed to use dark raisins and light raisins.
I bet you if we use light raisins, the color comes out lighter too.
Probably.
Anyway.
Should have used all light raisins, but I'm hoping that after a while it'll settle down and the color will come out really nice, and we'll see. I've never had dandelion wine before.
We did try making it one time about
disaster.
6 years ago, but we sort of decided to do it on the spur of the moment. We had no winemaking equipment. We didn't have the proper yeast. We had nothing that we needed. And of course, we tried to let it brew. It would not ferment. It just grew mold.
We tried using brewer's yeast.
Brewer's yeast tablets. Like nutritional
and we're
yeast
not even
supplements.
sure that they were alive.
Well, we did try proofing them.
They proofed,
They
right?
bubbled a little bit. But I'm sure that they were nowhere near strong enough, and who knows if we used the right amount. And
it got moldy. And we
it
threw
was
it
useless.
away.
It was not. That was dumb.
We didn't have the right equipment. We didn't have the right patience. We didn't have the right instructions.
Well, there's some things we've learned since then. At the time, we were more willing to sort of dive into a project without really researching it. Our garden was the same way. We just kind of threw the seeds in the ground and away we went. And since then, we've watched a lot of things about people doing various projects, and one of the things we've noticed is that the more preparation you do for something, the more likely you are to succeed at it.
Yeah.
Meaning, if you want to go off grid someday and have a homestead,
which we're not ready for.
not even close. But forget the homestead for right now. make sure that your little garden in your backyard becomes productive.
Mm-hmm.
Understand how to make the soil work. Understand how to make your 5 tomato plants bear fruit. Understand what makes it work.
So my goal is not to make the perfect wine, it's to improve every time. And someday, maybe I will make a perfect wine. But as of right now, we're just making drinkable wine.
Well, and what I noticed this time was when you prepared to make the wine, you did not just decide on the spur of the moment, I'm going to make dandelion wine. First of all, when you started with the first batch, you read and read and read about it. Then you looked up you spent a lot of time deciding what the best equipment would be to get.
Right. Well, we started investing in equipment and kind of setting aside a budget and saying, okay, these are the ingredients you need to have. And
we need to have this kind of yeast
mm-hmm.
and this kind of jar.
Yep.
And we need to have some wine tannins because we're not going to be able to age it in a barrel.
Right.
So it's just, I'm noticing that when we do projects now, we've changed a lot of things about how we do it.
And hopefully the results will be better. And the experience.
Well, our garden's been getting better.
Yeah. We're expanding our garden this year.
That's a big deal.
It is a very big deal. And we got rabbit manure.
And we talked about that.
Lots and lots of rabbit manure.
A couple weeks ago when we went out. I think we talked about that.
We still haven't spread it out yet.
I think that's probably a project for this week, is to get everything.
Most likely. Now, tomorrow, something interesting, the musical.
Oh, yeah. Some friends of ours are holding a recital. They do that once a year or so.
I never participate. I heard Abigail asking, why does Dad never participate?
So I'm singing a song with my sisters. We were requested to do things on a movie theme this year, which actually kind of threw me for a loop. We don't watch that many movies, and I was sort of at a loss for what we could do. My sister came up with singing the song Somewhere from West Side Story. She found an a cappella version done by the Celtic Women singing group. And we couldn't find music for it, so she actually listened to it for weeks and transcribed it. She has perfect pitch. Because, when I listen to it, I usually can pick out a lot of the harmonies and stuff. I have no idea how she transcribed this.
So she actually wrote it down on...
She wrote it by hand on paper. Yeah, I think she used the GarageBand program on her iPhone so that she could put the notes in there and make sure that the chord sounded right.
That's pretty neat.
So we were practicing that this week. We went over to their house a few times. And then I was practicing with the girls. They're going to sing My Favorite Things from Sound of Music.
Now, I tested out the mics for the first time while they were practicing. I just popped the mics in there and hooked it up to my phone and recorded a little bit of them singing. And I thought it turned out pretty good.
It sounded a little rough around the edges as far as our singing went.
It was your practice. It was the first time.
Practice.
So you've had another practice since then, and now you were practicing a little bit today, right, with Abigail singing?
I was practicing with Abigail today.
And Susanna?
I never know. I've had them sing a few times at recitals because they always want to do something, and they're not learning any instruments yet, but they like to sing. And I figure if I get them in the habit of doing that, they will learn. Eventually, they'll learn to sing like my sisters and
they're a little bit unpredictable right now.
They are very unpredictable. I really have no idea what they'll do when they get up there. They may sing very nicely. They may not have any clue what to do, and they may just stand there.
Now, last year, was it Abigail or Susanna that was crying or something?
I asked my sister to help out, and she picked Susanna up, and Susanna was really upset by that because she expected to be standing next to Abigail, so she wouldn't sing. I forget, she just did something weird like that.
I remember I had Elena, and Elena cried.
Elena was upset that we went up without her.
Right.
I was planning to take her up with me. I actually put her on the program. I don't think she'll sing anything. She sings sometimes when she feels like it.
If she's there, and as long as she doesn't make a fuss, I think it'd be fine.
I think she might make a fuss if she stays behind. I don't know what she'll do.
So I'll watch Daniel.
I figured that would just give you Daniel. He's probably going to be a little disconcerted that we go up without him, too.
Maybe, but if Daddy's here, I'll be holding him.
You just do what you can.
It's going to be an odd experience for Daniel. Last time he was there, he was so small. I mean, now he's big enough to look around and see things and talk about them.
Yeah.
Daniel doesn't really talk yet. But he talks. You know how that works?
Yeah, he decided about 2 weeks ago. I was getting a little concerned because he really only spoke 2 words, and he didn't really make a lot of sounds. And his 2 words were pretty much dad and uh-oh. And he did not have any vocabulary. And he was 17 months old. And I'm like,
he said, hi, Dad.
Occasionally, or he'd wave bye sometimes.
Bye.
And I'm like, are you going to start speaking, or are we going to have to work with you? And then 2 weeks ago, out of the blue, he just started talking. You can't understand a word he's saying.
But he's definitely talking.
But he's using all the inflections. He uses hand gestures. He's pointing at things. You can tell from the way he's speaking, he's using words.
It's just really
And
strange.
now what's really bizarre is he'll be speaking, and he'll say a whole sentence to me, and sometimes I know what he said.
He said his name. He said Daniel.
Well, like today at dinner, we were talking about how he never says hi, Dad, anymore, and he got this big grin on his face, and he goes, hi, Dad. And Ben started laughing, so he thought it was funny, so he says it again, hi, Dad. It's like, you understand every word, don't you? And he says, hi, Dad.
That boy's listening. Well, he's at the point now where, he's somewhere in between being a baby and not being a baby anymore. That 1.5, 18-month, time
frame. He is
frame.
18 months now.
And when they're 18 months, that's kind of that transition between being a baby and not. So he spilled water. He had like one of those sippy cups. And
we don't ever have the valves in them.
Yeah, he took the valves out. So he's had water, and he pours it upside down, and he's like, ooh, neat, stuff comes out. And there's like a puddle on the ground. I'm like, Daniel, go get a towel and clean this up. And he looks at me like, Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, Daniel, go get a towel and wipe up the mess you made. So, and he comes back with a towel. He starts cleaning it up. I'm like, you knew all along, looking at me all dumb like that. Come on.
Oh, he heard you.
He heard me. He knows we're talking about him.
No, he probably had a bad dream. That was his bad dream squeak.
No, we might need to reassure him everything's fine.
Yeah, I might. That's going to be tricky with the mics on.
Well, we'll monitor the situation. See if he's okay or not.
He is okay, but I don't know if he's going to make a really big fuss.
Well, what else did we want to talk about?
My
trip to Cleveland.
Cleveland, yep.
I went down, visited a facility called Advanced Polymer. They have a product called Chemoline, and we got the whole treatment. We got to see the plant. We got the whole tour. Got to shake a lot of hands. Got to meet the scientists in the white lab coats. I think they were dressed up just for us. Made sure that we wear the safety goggles. Actually, the lab was the most interesting part because they had like a bunch of experiments and they explained them all what they were doing. One of them was a primer coat that had a UV sensitive coating. The paint that glows really brightly under a UV light as a primer. So you can, if there's any scratches or dents or missed spots or spotting,
well, that's interesting.
You can shine the UV light on it and it just really shines right out. You can see it.
So for a coating where it's really, really important to make sure everything is coated.
Yep, I thought that was interesting.
It is interesting.
And we went out to lunch. It was kind of...
At the hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant?
So we go to this little hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant, and they're saying, oh, let's go to this really nice restaurant. I'm thinking really nice restaurant means a really nice restaurant. But no, it was right next to a thrift, like a mom-and-pop thrift store in a strip mall. And we walk in, and you're presented with the bar with all the drinks, and it felt like kind of a dive bar. But then we walked past the wine racks and into the dining area, and it was nicer. You got the tablecloth and the nice pictures on the walls and stuff, but it still was not what you would think of as a nice fancy restaurant.
Until you ate the food. We
ordered the food. We got the menu, and there was nothing on there under $10 pretty much. It was all pretty upper end food, more expensive food.
Well, for us anyway.
For us, I mean, but for
we eat at McDonald's.
But for a dive kind of restaurant, I wouldn't have expected that. I would have expected like bar food or something.
Truth is, it wasn't a dive.
In the end, it was not a dive. Basically, the food that they served there was pretty amazing. It was very high-end stuff.
It sounds to me like somebody who's getting their restaurant off the ground.
Well, we walked in there and we heard pound, 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 pound. They were pounding the chicken and pounding the veal because they only had maybe a half dozen things that they served at that restaurant. So I thought that was interesting. And we walked in there and they were understaffed. They had someone in the kitchen, they had the owner, and they had one waitress to run the whole place. and she looked frazzled. She was worried that we were going to give her a hard time, and she apologized right up front that they were understaffed.
What she knew was that the lunch rush was coming, and because apparently this restaurant is already known, that lunch rush was a lunch rush.
I thought it was cool because this was a local attraction. This is a little place, a little dive that people locally know about.
It's not a dive.
Well, I call it. It's not a dive.
It's a hidden spot.
It's a hidden treasure. Hidden treasure. It's one of those things that, given different circumstances, that guy would have a very nice, fancy restaurant, and people would come from miles away for his food.
The truth is, he's probably just starting it, and he is going to end up with a nice restaurant.
I hope
he
so.
had the sense to not put himself deeply in debt for a building, but to start with a small place.
Well, I really hope so, because the food was fantastic. The service was great, considering the circumstances. The waitress was really appreciative that we were patient with her, and
Do you remember what it was called?
Frijoles. Frijoles,
it's in Cleveland?
Well, Metro Cleveland area. I don't know where exactly.
Somewhere in there. You got lost.
It wasn't that far from the build. I could probably find it. I should probably give it a good review on Google.
Give it some. Well, you're giving it a bit of a review now.
If you're ever in the Cleveland area, look up Frijoles. All their food is basically, you have your different frijoles meals. You can have veal frijoles or chicken frijoles or beef frijoles. I don't recommend the shrimp frijoles, but that's just me. So
that was that Thursday?
That was Thursday.
You were gone all day?
Yep. So we had kind of a full day on Tuesday and then a full day on Thursday. And then Wednesday we went out to AIT, so we were gone.
Yeah, we were gone a lot this week.
So, but now we're rolling into the next week.
Felt like I spent all week catching up to our double Sabbath last week. I finally got the wash done.
And next week, I think either next week or the week after that, we have a trip planned out to Oxychem. So.
Oh, are we going out to Oxychem, or are you and Dad going out to Oxychem?
Well, we're still trying to figure that one out.
Oh, we don't know that yet. Okay.
I have a feeling it might just be us.
Okay.
We'll see. So that was our work week anyway. Yes, I work more than 3 days a week. But those are the highlights.
Well, some days are real quiet, some days are real busy.
Right. So, Torah portion?
Torah portion.
We're at 27 minutes.
Well, we could probably do a quicker Torah portion this time. Do you remember what chapter it is?
It was Leviticus 19.
Which is an interesting chapter because as we were noticing it when we went through it, it seems to be God more or less reframing the Ten Commandments. He's giving them in a different order, and he's describing a little more what he means when he says, you shall not bear false testimony, or you shall honor your father and mother. But what's makes it kind of really peculiar and unique is there's a lot of kind of little chunks of other commandments sprinkled in there. There's a section of commands about what to do with your fruit trees when you're in the land. Mm-hmm. And then there's a little reminder about how to offer a peace offering.
Offerings.
None of the other offerings, just the peace offering.
This is the Torah portion that has the famous love your neighbor as yourself, the second greatest commandment, which is pretty cool.
Does it ever actually say that? Where does it say love your neighbor as yourself? I didn't hear that.
It says...
you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. I think it's just a summary of what this
You shall not
says.
stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord.
That is what it's describing.
Yeah, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. It says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people.
There it is.
But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
And everything that comes before that is all the descriptions of the commandments, the 10 commandments that are about loving your neighbor. Mm-hmm. It's the commandment about honor your father and mother, which is interesting. That's your neighbor.
Yeah, it actually says fear your mother and your father.
Although he inserts and keep my Sabbaths.
And keep my Sabbaths.
And then it says don't turn to idols. And then it talks about the peace offering sacrifice. But it talks a lot about don't put a stumbling block before a blind person or mock a deaf person. Do not, when you testify in a court, don't slant your testimony toward a person who is poor or who is rich because they're poor or rich, which is interesting because that's part of not bearing false testimony. It's not just don't lie. It's a lot of other things. Don't weight your testimony because you want to be sympathetic to one side or the other.
So the whole thing's prefaced with, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." That's like the thesis of this.
What does it mean to be holy? Well, let me tell you.
And then it goes on and explains, what does it mean to live a holy life? And then it goes on even further. You shall not steal. And it goes on to describe all the different aspects of stealing.
One of the things that it goes into not stealing is don't deny a worker their wages. Don't cheat them out of some of the wages that you promised them.
I find it interesting that under the category of do not steal, it says the wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. And I remember there's another place where it says you pay your worker while the sweat's still on their brow.
So basically, as soon as the work is done, you pay them. And there's so many people in business today who do not do that.
Can you imagine how smoothly our economy would operate if people got paid the instant they do the work?
There are so many people who just drag their feet on paying because either they don't have the money and the bigger the company, the worse they are at it too.
Right.
They figure you're just going to have to wait your turn, buddy. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Well, especially when it's manual labor.
I know.
Because there's this whole hierarchical structure where the people at the bottom do the actual work, but then they got to wait for the people above them to get paid, and they have to wait for the people above them to get paid, and then ultimately you got to wait for the people above them to get paid. So it's like cascading down.
Well, I remember someone who paid you for a while used to say, well, you don't get paid till I get paid, and then he would delay on the billing for long periods of time. Meanwhile, our bank account was really low, and you'd done the work. We were waiting for him to do the billing, and he would always say, well, you can't get paid till I get paid. And really, God is saying that's not the way you treat your workers. And if you pay as soon as the work is done, my guess is that you wouldn't delay on the billing.
Yeah.
So he was not cheating us, by the way, in any way. That was just the way he ran his business. But that's not the way God says to run a business.
Which operates fine if you're by yourself.
Right, and he really, I think, is not used to being able to function with employees.
Mm-hmm.
I think was part of the issue. But it reminds me, when I was reading this, about how that really put us in a bind in several situations, because we were waiting and waiting and waiting for a paycheck to come in, and we were not in charge of billing the customer.
Now, this is not directly related to the Torah portion, but we had unexpected visitors this morning.
Oh, yeah.
Which was nice. We basically got up and we got a text message from our friends Javan and Tanae.
Yes.
And they were coming regularly every Saturday morning and visiting with us. And we would talk usually about the Torah portion, or about whatever was on our mind or whatever was going on for the day.
Whatever was on their mind.
Whatever was on their mind. We would just have a conversation. And
they're with the Jehovah's Witness organization, so they knocked on our door initially.
Yeah, and when anyone knocks on my door, I don't care what denomination they are, but if anyone knocks on my door and wants to talk Bible, come on, have a seat.
My point of view is always don't waste their time, Ben. Although I have to say that with them, I don't know that it's been a waste of their time. I think we end up spending a lot of time talking together.
Well, it hasn't been a waste of our time, that's for sure. And it's a Saturday morning, so it's perfect time for us.
Well, hopefully it's not a waste of their time.
It must not be. They called us up and they said we'd like to come by. And I was tickled. I was really, because it had been months and months and months.
Well, last time they were here, they sort of said, well, we recognize that you're not going to come to our meetings, or you're not really interested in joining our organization, but we've been given a responsibility that we really are supposed to be spending this time reaching out to people who perhaps need the reaching out more than we did. They didn't really want to say that, but we knew what they meant.
Yeah. We didn't want to take time away from people who may need to hear what they had to say.
Well, and their time is precious too. They really scrape together the time to go around on Saturday and find people to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And we said we completely understand.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen them since before knew I was expecting again. So it's been 4 or 5 months.
And it was nice also they had their daughter with them. So
yeah.
It was, I don't remember her name.
Taylor.
So that was really nice. And we had some good conversation. And it's funny, going through the Torah portion, we realized that a lot of what we talked about was the Torah portion unintentionally.
I think I fell asleep while we were reading Torah portion last night, so I must have heard it subconsciously.
It's just funny how we kind of were reviewing it a little bit before the show, and we're like, we talked about this morning.
We did.
So anyway, that was a real nice treat this morning, I thought.
We did. And a regular Bible study wasn't meeting today, which apparently we were pretty tired because we forgot about that. And we texted them saying, I think we're not going to come today.
We didn't get our nap in today like we were hoping.
Well,
children did not allow us to get our nap in like we normally would like to get in today.
I ended up falling asleep anyway, and I got woken up because the kids think if Mama's eyes are closed, she needs a report on everything that's happening just in case she's missing it.
Well, there was an incident where you fell asleep, and I was not paying very close attention to the children, and they kind of...
The whole house exploded.
The house did not explode.
Well, it looked like it.
But there's like little tornadoes just running around the house, just tearing it apart.
Every pillow in our house was on the floor in the living room, and there was raisins all over the floor. I don't know what happened.
Crayons all over the floor.
There was a pile of crayons under the table. This is why we keep minimizing our possessions, and we're getting away from the Torah portion now.
Oh, we really are straying away. Well,
anyway.
That was what the Torah portion was mostly about. It's a very, very good chapter. It's kind of buried in Leviticus. And there is a huge, I think there's treasures buried all throughout this.
If you really wanted a nutshell of what God thinks about living a holy life is, I think if you read Leviticus 19 and maybe 19 and 20, you'd get a really good overview of how God expects you to act, how he expects you to live your life, how he expects you to treat the people around you, how he expects you to look to him. It is very interesting. It is a microcosm. It's like almost the core of the commandments.
And he expounds on the 10 Commandments. More details.
And isn't it interesting that the only sacrifice he talks about is the peace offering?
Yeah, that is interesting.
He doesn't talk about the sin offering. He doesn't talk about the wave offerings, although I guess you could fold the peace offering into that. But it's just really interesting that when people think about the Old Testament commandments, they tend to focus in on all the sacrifices. But if you look at the core of what God instructs, and I think Jesus was referencing this when he said, you love the Lord your God. And
Leviticus 19 is what Yeshua was talking about with the second greatest commandment.
I think he may have been, I think the first greatest commandment may be in here also. My guess is.
Well, yeah.
I mean, Moses says it later in Deuteronomy. It says it right out. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, but...
Well, yeah, it starts off with, do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal.
I am Yahweh your God.
That's right. So it's all right here.
So this is the core of what people would call the law. And what's fascinating is, I think that if people really absorbed what this is, it would be very shocking.
Yeah.
For many, if you haven't delved into God's laws at all, or if you thought of them as past or done away with, reading this, there is nothing that isn't relevant.
And reading Leviticus 19 in particular, it's all kindness based. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap the field right up to its edges. Leave it for the poor, essentially. Or if you grapes fall to the ground, don't pick them up and harvest them. Leave them.
Right.
For the poor and the needy, they'll come and pick it up. It reminds me of Ruth. She was poor and needy, and she followed behind Boaz, picking up the extra grain.
But this is a very, very, and it may seem, when we were reading it, it's like it almost seems a little random. Why were these commands put in the order they're put? And the thing about the original scriptures is that God spoke them, and he put them in the order he wanted them, and then he instructed Moses to write them down. This was a very unusual thing to do. So, we haven't really sorted out in our minds what we think the meaning of the order is. It's clear God has a meaning for why he scrambles the commands like he does.
And he'll put Sabbaths in kind of almost, it's not random, but it seems random.
Oh, there is another offering, a guilt offering.
A guilt offering. So, just almost, like for example, at one point it says, you shall fear your mother and your father. And then he says, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. So you're wondering, fearing your mother and your father, and why mother and then father, instead of father then mother?
That is an unusual
so fear your mother
order.
And father and keep my Sabbaths. And then later on he says, you shall keep my Sabbaths and fear my sanctuary. How do you fear a sanctuary?
Well, you could say reverence, treat with respect.
Treat with respect. Well, the translation here says reverence my sanctuary.
Then it moves on. Don't turn to mediums or necromancers. Okay, we're moving right on to witchcraft.
Right. And then it talks about honoring the elderly. Stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord.
When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat him as the native among you.
Right.
You shall love him as yourself.
For you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
I mean, which of these commands can we say is gone?
God puts his name on all of these.
Every single one of these is signed with his signature.
It's signed. It says, I am Yehovah your God.
At the end of each one of these little blocks.
At the end of each one, he'll sign each one of these commandments with his name.
It is quite an extraordinary little piece of work.
Yep.
It's not that little.
Did it stop recording?
No. It's telling us we have an update available.
Okay. Well, that's probably a good cue to call it a night. It's 40 minutes. So, I think we're going to say good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.